Thank you, Chairman. And I'd first like to welcome Mr. Gleeson here and his team, and thank him for coming in front of us to be scrutinised, I suppose, by us how public money is being spent. I just want to do a few sundry things first. I want to ask you about being a farmer myself, naturally. The beam scheme, the beef scheme, and the beef data and genomic scheme. I want to know, are they subscribed fully, or undersubscribed, or oversubscribed? Because it'd be very interesting with funding, what funding is available to farmers. Just three. The beam I want to ask about first.
Yeah. So, and excuse me, because people are watching might know what that scheme means. Yeah. Just give the full name and say what it is, so the people watching understand what we are talking about.
Okay. So the beam scheme was the scheme introduced to assist farmers who were very badly affected by difficult market conditions in 2018 and early 2019. There was a potential funding of 100 million available for that. 50 million of it was EU funding, 50 million national. And we have applications to the tune of 78 million in for the beam scheme. So our intention is to start paying that money in December.
What will happen to the other 26 million that's left? That's not going to be spent if that bit yours? No,
well, the funding was made available on the basis of demand. The demand has been 77 million, 78 million. And we've announced a separate set of measures for 2020.
I can ask you, why do you think that it was undersubscribed? Why is that 26 million not being taken up? I thought to be oversubscribed personally, from a personal point of view, farmer point of view.
Yeah, well, it's difficult to know. I suppose you configure a scheme to allow for the maximum number of eligible animals. And that's what we did. And so we wanted to be in a position to be able to pay every potential applicant without cutting payments, because there were demands placed on people in this scheme. It wasn't just income support.
Yeah, the biggest demand was the biggest problem was that you had to weigh the two animals.
Well, in this particular scheme, in the beam scheme, the demands related to membership of a quality assurance scheme. Environmental conditionality, and also there was a requirement to reduce your nitrogen load by 5%. And I think we discussed this the last time I was here, Deputy. So these were conditions established in a Commission regulation, and it may be that for some potential applicants they weren't happy to try and meet those demands. The beef scheme is, well, maybe I should start with BDGP, which is the Beef Data and Genomics Scheme. And that's a scheme where we're trying to improve the genetic quality of our beef herd, and for two reasons. One is that we want to make the herd more climate efficient, because the more you can produce from lower inputs, the more climate efficient the herd becomes. And also we wanted to improve the quality of the herd and the economic efficiency of the beef herd. We have about 24,000 farmers in that, and our funding for 2018 was more or less fully subscribed, and we expect it to be this year as well. And then in this year we created an addendum to that beef scheme, because one of the things that was missing, I suppose, was this issue of weighing weanlings at weaning point, which is a big indicator of the quality of calves. And it was a significant addition to the database we're trying to create, which will inform policy into the future. And that scheme, we initially provided about 20 million for that, and about 18.5 million, I think, is taken up for that. So it's more or less close to full subscription of that.
Yeah. Just one comment. I was disappointed. All farmers lose animals, and to say if you lost a cow, we say an animal mother. I only found this when we applied for my son, myself applied for that was excluded. Even though you had the calf, the mother died. Unfortunately, which every farmer loses animals. That was excluded. I thought that was a severe penalty enough. I thought when the animal was there, had the calf, okay, something happened during the year, an animal dies, and it was excluded. I thought that should have been included. Yeah, well, that's just a comment.
Well, I mean, just to respond to that, so you don't always think of everything that might happen when you establish a scheme, but when you do establish a scheme, you have to submit the terms and conditions to the Commission. And once you do that, it's locked in, and you have to meet those terms and conditions. And And look, perhaps that's a flexibility we might have built into the scheme, but we didn't when we submitted it, so we were stuck with it.
Well, that's why I just passed a comment on it, because it's a fallen animal. No one wants to lose an animal, but it happens.
Sure.
Now, I want to move on to the Board Nagan and Board Nagapel and the money they get every year. I think Board Nagan gets 16 million and the Horseport gets 64 million. What oversight do you continue on that? Once you hand the money over to both bodies, do you have an oversight in a role to play during the year in making sure that it's carried out and money is being spent wisely? And the reason why I ask this is because of the Board Nagan and the controversy about greyhound and welfare of greyhounds. I'm asking to know, have you a role to play during the year on how that's been rolled out?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing is that these bodies are statutory bodies. They have their own statutory functions. So just to make that clear. Secondly, we do have an oversight role. We have oversight and implementation agreements with those bodies. When they ask for funding, we have a standard mechanism for assessing whether they need it or not, based on cash flow statements that they issue. Our oversight agreement requires meetings at a senior level within the department a number of times a year, and that happens. They are required to have their own internal audit arrangements. They are subject to audit by the CNAG. They are required to submit their accounts to the department, to government and to this House. And their board and their chief executive are amenable to this House as well. So, and I know they've been in quite recently. Are
you satisfied that their welfare policy is up to standard and it's been implemented as per the book?
Well, I think what's clear from what's gone on over the last few months is that all has to be reviewed, and I'm satisfied that the board have taken on board the lessons of the events over the last few months, and that they're working hard to improve welfare. But I also think that, I suppose, what we saw on that particular programme was the behaviour of individual owners. I don't believe that it's reflective of the vast majority of people involved in the greyhound sector. But it's clear the sector has a job to do to restore its reputation. I think that's really important. And I think the board is determined to try and do that because they have a difficult job to do.
Agree. I just want to move on. Horseport Ireland, they do get so much money every year, and I know it's increased from 2016, 2 million, 2016, 2.5, 17, and I think it's gone up to 3 this year. And we met them as politicians, we met them there before the budget, and they showed the Indicon report, even that was done in 2016, said that there's great potential in this, where a return of 1,000 times a return of taxpayers' money spent will get back because of horses, show jumping, selling horses. And do they get proper recognition for what they do here in Ireland compared to Board Nagapel or Board Nagan? When they're only getting 3 million this year, should they be getting more money? As I said,
Horseport Ireland.
Horseport Ireland. Because the return, and I have it all here, and I put in a parliamentary question on it lately, and the Minister, they maintain if they got more money to be £1,000 times money coming back to the country by exporting. And in Kilkenny in particular, we have some great show jumpers, and we've got 3 gold medals in the recent sports. So it is a big seller of horses and a big feather in our cap all over the world. Show jumping is that interesting.
Well, so in a way, that's it's kind of a policy question you're asking me, but I don't intrude on policy, but I don't mind saying something about the background to this, if you wish. So, I mean, it's a historical reality that we had a horse and greyhound fund, and that from a statutory perspective, that fund was directed towards the thoroughbred horse sector and the greyhound sector. So that's the way the legislation is written. I mean, we've had approaches from various bodies over the last few years, explaining that they have significant potential for economic development, and many of the cases we see have merit. But of course, we're constrained by the funding we have, and it'd be nice to be able to help everybody to the extent they wish, but that's just not possible. In the context of Horseport Ireland, there was an effort to kind of cohere their efforts into a kind of strategic policy plan, and Minister Coveney at the time actually organised a committee, and the body established a strategic plan for the industry, reaching new heights, And then, as a condition, I suppose, of additional funding, the department commissioned a report by Indicon to look at the structures in Horseport Ireland, because it's an unusual thing. It's a company limited by guarantee. It was established in 2007. It's an amalgamation between the Equestrian Federation of Ireland and what was the Irish Horse Board, and it had I think, 27 different affiliate bodies, all of whom were on the board. So while that had strengths from the point of view of representative nature, it wasn't good from the point of view of structuring a board and developing a strategic plan. So Indicon was written, the board has been restructured. We still have representatives of all the affiliates in advisory subcommittees, but that work has been done. And bit by bit, the department has been increasing the funding. It's gone from €2.5 million in 2018 to €3 million in 2019, €4 million in 2020. And HSI also gets funding from the Department of Tourism and Sport, because so what the department provides is essentially for the development of breed, and what sport provide is for the development of the sport. So I mean, obviously there's a policy question there. We'll be coming into an Olympic year soon, and I know that our show jumping team and our dressage team have both qualified for the Olympics, but our department won't be providing funding for that.
Okay. Just another policy issue again is the farm retire scheme, which we had, which was a great scheme going back, and it was EU funded. We're going back into cap talks again, and I know this is a policy issue again. Would you support a farm retirement scheme? Because I've been asked by a lot of people recently, could we get it back, and that it helped to bring young farmers into the system, and all the farmers retired.
Yeah. Well, again, I don't want to intrude on policy and
well, I just asked you for a review.
But I mean, I suppose what I can say is that when we had that scheme, at one stage we did an economic evaluation of it, and the conclusion was that essentially there was a fair bit of dead weight in it. In other words, that we were funding people who were on the cusp of doing this anyway. And one of the issues that occurs to me is that I think it was designed to get people who were over 55 out of the system. And forgive me for thinking now that 55 isn't as old as I used to think it was. And I think the demographic issue in farming is not about 55-year-olds. It's about 75. Exactly. And without prejudice to the competence of such people, I'm heading that direction myself. You know, if you're asking me, so the focus we've put in the last cap was on encouraging young people in. So we had a number of incentives for young people. But I accept that there's a great reluctance from older farmers to pass their land down or to get out. And that's something we have to reflect on in the context of the next cap. But in doing so, I think we'd also have to reflect on the outcome of our previous study, which showed that we were paying people for something that might have been going to happen, and it wasn't really that effective. And then there was the other issue, which was that once they got to 66, you had to net the payment of their old age pension. So there were all kinds of complexities with the old system, which limited its effectiveness. But I accept that it is an issue. We still have the demographic issue, and we have young farmers saying they're finding it difficult to get land from older farmers, and that's partly attributable to alternative uses for land, dairy expansion. There's lots of reasons for that, but look, it's an issue that we have to reflect on.
I just want to move on to afforestation again. I mean, it's disappointing with the results there on the planting and the amount of dairies that's been planted. We never reached our target since 2014, and way behind and underspent, and that's disappointing, especially where we are now with carbon footprints and where we are going with the green. You know, to say that we're not reaching our targets, and we had problems out there with beef, we had problems with oversupply. I mean, you know, afforestation is one of the answers to it, or another way of going, which is going to help the economy as well, and going to help our carbon footprint output. Why are we falling behind on planting, and why is that happening? And there are good schemes there, there are good grants there, and yet it's not happening. Have you done any study to know why it's not happening?
Yeah, well. I mean, I suppose, first of all, it is disappointing that we're not reaching our targets. And I mean, a couple of years ago, we were planting 6,500 hectares, and that's diminished now. So last year was our weakest year for quite a long time. It was just over 4.25.
Are there reasons for that?
4,250. Well, I think there are probably a number of reasons, and we have to examine our own conscience, I think, when it comes to the development of the next programme, the next cap. So, reasons, okay. One is that, look, there's a natural resistance among farmers to planting land, and I think you know that, Deputy. But our view is that this is a fantastic potential source of income for farmers, and it can coexist with livestock rearing. So I think that's a message that we need to get across to people. The second thing is that despite the fact that our planting has gone down, our overall stock of trees, if you like, is higher than it's ever been. So there's been a significant increase in the overall stock of trees in the last few years. And maybe there comes a point when the overall stock is increasing, where each additional hectare becomes more difficult to deliver on. I mean, I think there's a point there. The third thing is that there's been a fair bit of negative publicity about forestry, and so we've seen this.
Explain that.
We've seen this in Leitrim, for example, where maybe people are looking at the preponderance of Sitka spruce, for example, and I suppose what they're seeing there is that the fruits of policy as it was 30 years ago as trees mature. But we very much changed our policy now in favour of broadleaf. So we have this minimum requirement for every plantation that we plant 15% of broadleaves. We have a target of 30%. The overall stock of broadleaves in the country is about 29% of the overall.
What is the breakdown with the forestry trees, the spruce and
yeah, so the overall stock, the breakdown is about 29% of native species compared to Sitka spruce. And last year, after we did our mid-term review, because we dramatically increased the grants available for broadleaves, it went from 21% to 27% in 2018.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt and take. Can I just ask a point of clarification, Mr. Gleeson? You said that we were at our highest afforestation rate. Do you mean in the ownership of the state, or what do you mean?
Overall. So, in other words, we have an afforestation programme in place for many, many years. Yeah.
Private farmers planting.
Yeah.
Drawing grants on it.
We have more trees in Ireland than we have ever had.
Yeah. No, so, and it's about 50-50. Well, ever is a long time. So, for example, one of the things you hear is that
record keeping then goes back several hundred years.
So one of the things I think I said in my opening statement is that we've 11% afforestation in Ireland compared to an average of 35%. But like that's an accident of history going back over the last 500 years. It's not that we've deforested to any significant extent. And one of the difficulties we have with our forestry programme is we have this requirement for people to replant forests once they plant them.
I'm not being pedantic, but I was of the view that Ireland was like 200-300 years ago.
An extra 5 minutes.
There was a vast.
No, sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt Deputy Aylward's time. If you make a statement, I just want to make sure that's based in fact.
Okay.
And we'll go back to and Deputy, I very much appreciate from an urban-based deputy. People mightn't get, that's why we want to spell out the details of what we're talking about.
Actually, Deputy, sorry. Deputy, I actually, my expert here has a bit more information than I have, so he tells me that it's the highest rate in 350 years.
Thank you. Okay.
So apologies for my hyperbole, but anyway, the point is the overall stock is increasing all the time, but we've a low overall stock compared to other European Union member states. I think when the
Vikings came here, it was all forestry.
Allegedly. I'm old, Deputy, but I'm not that old.
Anyway, look, just, sorry, the broadleaf, we're moving towards broadleaf, away from systems.
Well, we're trying to incentivise the planting of broadleaves, but I do think there is also, I mean, there's been a lot of narrative about the replanting obligation, and so farmers are reluctant to plant in circumstances where they have to keep that land planted in perpetuity. But the difficulty from a public policy point of view is the objective here is to increase the overall stock of trees. And if we don't have that replanting obligation, the risk is that people will start to deforest, and that could match
Can you see a time when it could be compulsory for every farmer to put a percentage of his farm into? Can you see that happen? We say with the carbon footprint and everything. Can you see that every farmer will be required to maybe 10%? I'm just saying.
Well, one of the things I think that Commissioner Hogan mentioned in the context of the CAP was a requirement for every farmer to plant a hectare of trees. So, I mean, that could be an option in the next Common Agricultural Policy. From the point of view of developing an industry around that, there would be difficulties, I think, from the practicality point of view on harvesting. And there would also be potential difficulties, I think, in capacity, because you have so many companies planting trees. If they had to plant a hectare of trees on individual farms, I'm not certain the capacity would exist. So there would be practical considerations in developing a policy of that nature.
Okay. Just because my time is running, I want to ask a few more questions. The 100 million that you handed back or wasn't spent last year, and you carried over 20 million then into this year from last year. Why is that? When we say farming, that year was a bad year, and yet we have 200 million gone back into the coffers that could have been spent as from an agricultural point of view, I think that's questionable. Why is that happening? Or why it's not being spent?
So, and I've seen this. I've seen this in the media. So, the fact is that most of that related to receipts that arrived in early or late. So, what you're looking at there with the 200 million is the net figure. So, what happened was that an 82 million receipt we were expecting in respect of the Rural Development Fund in 2017 arrived in 2018. And equally, our assessment was that because of changes in European Union legislation, we wouldn't get some of the rural development funding for 2018 till 2019, and we got that actually in 2018. So there were two very large receipts which make up the bulk of that. So it's not that we spent 200 million less than we had, it's that we got appropriations and aid to a significant amount of that. So the actual spending figure, I think, was 40 million. So we spent 40 million less than we had. And the reason for that is that when you have schemes, rural development schemes, you make prudent provision for what might mature during the year, but they're demand-led. And if the demand doesn't arise, you can't spend the money. And the second thing is that I think, and I might have mentioned this the last day I was here, when we set up the TAM scheme, the Agricultural Investment Scheme, previously, we made what I think wasn't the best decision, which was that we would give three people 3 years. Once they had an approval, they had 3 years to deliver on the investment. And what that meant was it was very difficult to predict when the approval would mature and when you'd spend it. And since then, we've changed that to 1 year. So what we're finding now is that our capital investment schemes, we're spending much closer to budget now.
Yeah. What's the 20 million carry over in? Why was that carried over, or why was that allowed to be carried over?
Yeah, well, it's a feature of the public spending code that you can carry over a proportion of capital savings into capital expenditure in the next year, and we've been doing that. 10% is allowed by the public spending code, and that's what we do. And that's subject to a negotiation every year with the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. So.
I just want to ask you about the loan, the 25 million loan scheme there, the Corporation of Ireland Bank, which you oversee. Who benefited from that? Was it, have you breakdown of where the money went, or what type of farmer, or who got it, or who applied for it, or who's entitled to it?
Yeah, so what we paid into that was 25 million, and the Department of Business Expenditure and Innovation also paid in funding. And what that did was it levered €300 million in loan funding for SMEs and mid-cap companies. 40% of the fund was dedicated to food businesses, and it was for working capital loans. I think the interest rate was around 4.2%. But the key feature of it, I think, was that you didn't require security to get the loan. So that was for small companies and mid-cap companies, that particular scheme. There was another scheme, the Brexit Loan Fund, which was made available to farmers. And again, it was the same configuration. We put in 25 million and Debbie put in funding. We got leveraged a fund of 300 million, and that was made, 40% of that was made available to farmers.
Does that go directly to farmers?
Yes, 40% of it went to farmers, yeah. Or is available to farmers. I don't have the precise figures about who drew down what, but I can get them for you.
And just for information purposes, how did that compare to, we say, to the general bank, that a farmer goes to a bank and, like we all did all our lives, and go to a Bank of Ireland, AIB, whoever, and how does this compare to that? Why is this different to, we say, a general loan that you can get from the main banks? Yeah,
I mean, I think the big, with the working capital scheme, the big thing was, I think, that you didn't require security. And I think that was also the same with the Future Growth Loan Scheme for farmers, that they didn't require to put up their land or as security to get the funding.
And if someone reneged on the loans, then how did you get the money back?
Well, one of the reasons we put the funding in was for two reasons. One was as a kind of an interest subsidy, and the second thing was to take some proportion of first losses on the scheme. But I can tell you, because we have significant engagement with the banks, and you'll know this anyway, there is a very, very low level of default from farmers on bank loans. They are reliable payers, and they tend not to over-leverage themselves, despite what you read and things. So, based on,
I have one more.
Allowed for the extra time.
I just have one more. Yeah. The last one I want to ask you, I have several more, but this is the one I'm going to be allowed, is the
first round.
The NACRI service, just because we met him yesterday here ourselves in the house, and there's an ongoing problem with it, and you know, it's a very vital service. Any farmers have fallen cattle and the factories, etc., and there's an ongoing problem there. I thought it sorted out there 2 months ago. It seems to be sorted out by yourselves. You seem to be taking over, and really what is to pay for the rendering, that's what they're looking for, and the farmer and the knackeries didn't have the cost of the rest, but that the department take over the rendering end of it. And I just want your comment on that, because it's serious and we can't then go on strike, because, you know, it'll happen, disease control, etc. And as I said, every farmer has these problems with farm animals. So I just want to comment on that, and where do you see it going? Because we're coming into the winter now, into the spring calf, and then it's a serious time we don't want knackeries yards to be closed.
Yeah, well, I agree that it's a vital service for rural Ireland and for Ireland generally. And the question in this, I suppose, is who pays for what? Who pays for rendering? How do we subsidise the service? And we're in an ongoing discussion with the knackeries on that point.
But the department did want
we have substantially reached agreement, but there are elements which are still under discussion. Look, I don't want to prejudice those discussions other than to say that we recognise how vital the knackery service is, and we're working constructively with the sector to try and finalise any remaining issues. But we also have to have regard to the public purse, and that's our concern in the context of this.
Prior to was it 2010, I'm sure the dates now, the department did pay for the rendering, and that's what the knackeries are looking for, to go back to that, and they then charge the farmer for connection on, etc., the costs and all the other costs. And could that be a possibility? Well,
prior to 2010, we did pay a lot more for as a subsidy to the knackery service. That's true, and by we I mean the taxpayer. And so, in considering how we manage this now, we have to have regard to what the taxpayer pays compared to the knackeries, compared to farmers. But I think, look, we've substantially reached agreement on the key issues with the knackery service.
The last question, you know how serious it is. You know,
of course.
I mean, disease control, etc. You know, control of animals, and you know, you can't go out and dig a hole anymore.
No.
Traceability, all that comes into it, and they play a very important role in traceability.
And that's the reason we reacted so quickly when there was a problem.
Thank you, Deputy.